After giving birth, I returned home from the hospital to find that my key wouldn't work. "Oh, you got discharged today? I figured you weren't coming back, so I changed the locks. You can't get in anymore. You and I are already strangers. I've already filed for divorce. If you had apologized right away, it wouldn't have come to this. Serves you right." My husband said those words and then hung up the phone. I held my newborn baby and gripped the key that was now useless because he had changed the locks without my knowledge. I could feel anger rising in my head at how my husband had treated me until this point. He probably thinks I'll come crawling back saying, "I'm sorry, please let me in." Maybe I would have done that in the past, but he doesn't deserve to be a father or even a husband. I've decided that I'm going to make him suffer, no matter what. So I decided to take action right away. I, Natasha, am currently a full-time housewife, 3 months pregnant. I was asked to quit my job when I got pregnant so that I could focus on being a homemaker. Although I was happy about being pregnant, I was honestly confused because I never thought I'd get pregnant just 3 months after getting married, and I still wanted to enjoy living with my husband alone as newlyweds. I'm an only child, so I've always wanted siblings. It's better to have more than one child. My husband had been saying that before we got married, and he was so happy about my pregnancy that he looked forward to the baby's arrival every day. Seeing my husband's excitement, I felt happy that I had been blessed with this child too, and we thought about names for our child even before finding out the gender. However, there were many difficult things amidst our happiness. Shortly after the pregnancy was discovered, my morning sickness became so severe that it was difficult to even sit up or do anything, whether lying down or standing up. The house gradually became messy, and I couldn't even manage simple household chores. Although my husband didn't say anything, he seemed clearly dissatisfied. I think his dissatisfaction began when I started sleeping before he came home from work, because I couldn't wait for him because of the severe morning sickness. I wanted to smile for my tired husband and listen to him, but I just didn't have the energy to do so due to the intense discomfort. "Hey, will you clean the room already? There's just so much dust everywhere. I want to eat food prepared at home instead of ordering delivery all the time. We're newlyweds, but is this how it's going to be?" I was most irritated when my husband said these words to me on his day off. "Well, then why don't you do it yourself?" I swallowed these words that were on the tip of my tongue and said with a smile, "You know, I've been telling you this from the beginning, but my morning sickness still hasn't gone away and it's really tough. So I'd be really happy if you could do what you can do to help. You're going to be a dad soon, so I hope you can understand a little and cooperate." I wanted to praise myself for being able to basically say, "Do it yourself, you lazy ass," with a smile, reminding myself that if I said unpleasant words, the baby could hear them. No, pregnancy and childbirth are mother's job. There's nothing I can do. You should know that. You have to deal with morning sickness and take care of me and the house until the baby is born, or we won't be able to manage. Fathers can spoil the child as much as they want once they're born, so it's fine. It happened to be noon, so he said this and went out for lunch. Lately, there have been many days when he would go out to eat and not come back until late. He didn't even do anything thoughtful, like buying something back for me. I don't hate my husband or anything, and I married him because I love him. But he doesn't do anything for himself, and when no one listens to his stories or things don't go according to his plans, he sulks. How immature is that? For example, before we got married, there were many times when I had to cancel our dates due to my work schedule. He would complain in dissatisfaction every time, and I would try my best to make him happy by treating him to a delicious meal or comforting him. When he came to my house to visit, he would complain that the cleaning wasn't thorough or that the food wasn't good enough, but I could still laugh it off back then. He would lazily stay over at my house for more than a week and not help with any housework. At that time, I guess my maternity instinct was stimulated, or I found him cute or something like that, and that's why I married him. But as we started living together, I began to see his negative side little by little. However, I kept those feelings bottled up and continued living like that, hoping that he would change a little once the baby was born. But I was wrong. Before I knew it, I had fallen asleep while thinking about such things, and it was already dark outside with the house starting to darken. My husband, who had gone out for lunch, had not yet returned home. I felt relieved that he wasn't there, but I also felt empty. As I looked at the messy room, the word divorce suddenly overlapped in my mind. But when I thought about the child that was about to be born, I wondered if that was wrong. However, I kept overthinking things in my head and felt more and more depressed, unable to get up. Days passed as I thought about such things and felt uneasy. While eating with my big belly, I suddenly felt water on my legs. Could it be my water breaking? I panicked and rushed into the house to check when I started to feel some pain in my belly. Since there were still a few days until the due date, I was scared and called my husband, who was at work. However, my husband didn't show any concern and instead scolded me for not sticking to the schedule and said he couldn't leave work suddenly. My husband's workplace was located in the middle between our house and the hospital, and he had promised to tell his boss and leave work when I went into labor. But now this was the reality. I decided not to be sad or resent my husband for now and focused on giving birth safely. I immediately called for an ambulance and was taken to the hospital. Even after arriving, I was struggling with the pain of labor. When the waves of pain subsided and I was a bit more conscious, I called my mother and mother-in-law and they rushed over. I frequently checked my phone, but there was still no message from my husband. I had no more energy to worry about him, and soon my cervix finally opened, and after a long fight, I gave birth to my cute child. After resting on the delivery table for a while, I was taken to a private room. My parents and in-laws praised me, saying, "You did well," and my mother-in-law held my hand tightly with tears in her eyes. But then she suddenly looked as if she remembered something and said, "Wait, Dan hasn't come yet, has he?" Everyone present suddenly realized the same thing, and all at once they began to ask, "Where is he? And what is he doing?" I myself had forgotten about my husband's existence and took out my phone to call him. "Hello? Where are you now? The baby was born safely. I want you to come now. Everyone is waiting." "Good job with the baby. But you're wrong. First, apologize to me. Say sorry for leaving me out of the loop, for giving birth earlier than planned, for messing up the schedule. It's your fault that I couldn't be there. I feel sorry for the baby because she was forced to come out early. Anyway, I still have some work to do, so I can't come. Bye." He said that and hung up. At that moment, I covered my face and cried loudly. My confused parents and in-laws asked about the situation, and I couldn't hold back, so I told them about how he had been acting lately. Everyone was angry after hearing it, and my in-laws apologized to me and my parents, but my feelings towards my husband had already cooled down completely. I'm thinking of divorcing him. I know the baby is just born, but I'm sorry, Mom, Dad. That's not something you should apologize for, Natasha. Yes, it's better to follow your heart, said my mother-in-law, and my father-in-law and my parents agreed. While relieved, I felt sorry for my baby, and my tears overflowed once again. I cried all night after everyone left. After I calmed down, I struggled with breastfeeding and taking care of my baby in the same room. One day, my mother-in-law came to visit me. After cooing at her grandchild and sitting next to me, she began to talk about my husband. I had never been told about it in detail, but when my husband was a child, my in-laws were both working, and he was what is called a latchkey kid. They taught him how to fold laundry and use the microwave so that he could do some things alone, and he was enthusiastic about being able to do things alone. However, once he was alone at home, he couldn't bear the loneliness and cried every day, often causing trouble for my in-laws. They had no choice but to apologize and ask relatives and friends to take care of him. Whoever finished work first went to pick him up. He occasionally had dinner with whoever was taking care of him, and my in-laws gave them a little bit of money. Whenever they told him to heat up his own food, he cried and screamed that he didn't want to and couldn't even touch it. So they had to leave him with someone else. When they began to feel guilty about leaving him with someone else's family, my in-laws decided to send him to cram school. They thought that if he finished cram school and came back, there would be less time for him to be alone at home. However, he cried even harder at the thought of coming home alone. The place where they went to pick him up had just changed from someone else's house to a cram school. He still didn't prepare any meals for himself. He used the pocket money given to him to satisfy his hunger before and after the cram school. And when his parents came to pick him up, they would go home together and he would have them prepare the meals. He has been living a selfish life without doing any housework for his working parents until now. Dan told us, "I hate being alone because I can't do anything on my own." So he only chose university and workplace where he could commute to from his home. That's why he can't do anything on his own. When he's at home, I end up taking care of him. I thought he would change when he got married and became a father, but he didn't change at all. I'm really sorry for causing you trouble, Natasha. I realized that our way of raising him was wrong. My mother-in-law said this with a sad expression. I strangely agreed that he wouldn't change just because he got married, since he had been like that since he was a child. I realized that I hadn't talked to my in-laws about how things were at home with Dan, and I unintentionally ended up telling my mother-in-law about it. That night, I was trying to get some sleep before the next nursing session, and then I received a call from my husband. "Did you say something to my parents? Is this your way of getting back to me for not visiting you? Don't be a tattletale, you brat." And he just hung up the phone. Who's the brat here? That jerk? I grumbled in my heart. I then calmed my mind as I looked at my sleeping baby next to me and fell asleep. Finally, it was time to be discharged, but my husband never came to see our baby even once. I feel relieved now, I thought with a strangely refreshed feeling as I returned home by taxi. When I arrived home, the taxi driver carried my luggage and came with me. While chatting, I took out my keys and tried to insert them into the lock. But it felt like the cylinder had been changed and the key didn't go in. Only my husband could have done something like this. Holding back my anger, I called my husband, and this is what he said to me. "Oh, you got discharged today? But this isn't your home anymore. This is my house. And you and I are already strangers. I've already filed for divorce. If you had apologized right away, it wouldn't have come to this. Don't you ever contact me again. Serves you right." He just said what he wanted to say as usual and hung up the phone. "Ah, that asshole," I muttered, realizing that I couldn't just take my infant outside for long. I immediately contacted my mom and explained the situation. After explaining everything and hanging up the phone, the taxi driver who had been watching everything nearby came running and returned my luggage to the car, opening the door for me. He seemed unusually enthusiastic, and I couldn't help but smile. Maybe it's like that saying, Schadenfreude, or joy in the misfortune of others. As soon as I arrived at my parents' house, I left my child with my mom and went to consult with a lawyer. The lawyer who assisted me listened to my story and then confirmed if I really wanted a divorce. Perhaps it was because I had let my emotions run wild and had been rambling on about everything that had happened up until today. The divorce papers had been submitted without my consent, so we had to go through a divorce invalidation mediation, and if we couldn't come to an agreement, we would have to go to court. But I had already made up my mind about the divorce, so I had no objections to the divorce itself. It was not just about me being insulted, but also about my husband not coming to see the baby and ultimately locking us out of the house. It was not something a person would do to others. Even I was about to lose my mind with anger. I told my lawyer that I wanted to claim compensation for the mental distress during pregnancy, child support, and property division as a sanction. I didn't think my husband would agree to mediation, but even if we went to mediation, I didn't think we would be able to reach an agreement. The lawyer mentioned that it was not possible to immediately file a lawsuit without going through mediation as a preliminary step, and I felt a little discouraged. But it was no longer just my own problem. I had a baby to protect. Rather than groveling to my husband and struggling to live as if nothing had happened, it would be better for the sake of my future and my baby to struggle. Besides, my husband submitting fake divorce papers was a completely separate issue from my intention to get a divorce. He deserved to suffer. I will file a complaint against my husband, I told my lawyer. Soon after that, my husband was arrested by the police. It turned out that he had been cheating on me with another woman in a house other than ours. I heard this from others, but apparently my husband had changed the locks right after I was hospitalized and was probably living there, but he couldn't handle the pile of dirty dishes and the stench in the house as he couldn't do any housework. So he decided to move in with his mistress. He was living there carefree, but then the police came to visit and he was arrested. When I told my in-laws that I had gone to consult with a lawyer, they tried to contact my husband and visited my house, but couldn't get through to him, and he hadn't returned to his parents' house either. They wondered where he could be, but they never thought he would be cheating. It turned out it had been going on for a few months. Well, there were signs. He would go out during the day and not come back until late at night, claiming he was working overtime. But at the time, I was suffering from morning sickness and dealing with my selfish husband, and I honestly thought that having some time alone was better. Maybe I was pretending not to notice he was having an affair. My husband kept blaming me, saying things like, "I'm not at fault, it's Natasha's fault for leaving me alone," to the police and lawyers. He was like a child, crying and wailing, unable to reflect on his own actions. And he realized during the lawsuit that the more he insisted on his innocence, the worse the situation became. He then apologized to me for the first time since we met, saying, "I was wrong about everything. Let's start over. I want to see my baby." Since we never met in person, I heard everything through my lawyer. When my husband told me, "Clean up for once," it was the most irritated I had ever been in my life. But this apology and selfish demand from him topped that and became the most irritating moment in my life. I asked my lawyer to convey this to him, and he said he would tell him exactly as I said. After that, things finally came to an end. I was able to get a fair share of the property and even received more compensation for emotional distress than I had expected, considering my husband's infidelity. And by the way, the house was in my husband's name, so I simply gave it to him without any hesitation. I didn't want a messy, foul-smelling house anyway. As for child support, it was agreed that he would pay it monthly, but I heard secretly from my mother-in-law that he quit his job and started working part-time after this incident became known at his company. It seems he tried to go back to his parents' home, but my father-in-law scolded him and told him he would never step foot in their home again. So he sold the house we used to live in and is living somewhere else now. I don't really expect much in terms of child support considering his situation. However, my in-laws offered to help for the sake of their grandchild and said they would pay separately from my husband. I couldn't accept money from my in-laws, but I bowed my head in gratitude for their kind gesture. Now I'm back at my parents' house, and with their help, I'm planning to take some time to rest my mind and body. Someday, I'll move out with my child and start working to live a modest but happy life. I'll do my best.